Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. This is part 2 of Jesse Feng's webinar. The first part, many of you have already attended, is about debate and public speaking, and it's all related to writing and expression. So far, that many people are very interested in improving their kids' writing skills, and summer is the best time for kids to attend writing related summer camps and classes. And Jesse, who is very good at debating and public speaking, who is also a very good writer. And Jesse is actually an established publisher, and on Amazon you can find Jesse's book. So for any of you who do not know Jesse very well, let me give another brief introduction. Jesse graduated from Johns Hopkins University, and she got the bachelor's degree in economics and international relations. And for this webinar, well, we're going to talk about writing, and we're going to focus on writing. And for one thing, we should mention that Jesse actually grew up here and in New Jersey. Jesse attended American schools, just like many of our kids. And for writing, Jessie is very outstanding, and for all the standard tests she ever took, she got scores with flying colors. And Jessie likes writing books and likes, writing books and also design curriculums to teach children. Jessie actually taught ACTs, NG-ASK, PARC, and other state standard tests, and also teaches AP English. So today we are lucky to have Jesse to come back again, and just to mention that Jesse already graduated from Johns Hopkins University. She already started working here in New Jersey. So congratulations to Jesse, and we should also thank Jesse that for her to make this seminar for all the children and all the parents here. And without further ado, let's hear Jesse Feng. Jesse, it's for you.
All right, thank you so much again for having me back, and thanks for listening in. I know it's a Tuesday night, so you have to fit this into all of your schedules. Don't know why my volume thing is weird. Okay. So I just want to say, thanks again, Louis, for that lovely introduction, and I guess I'll get started since you covered all the basics. There is one point that I would like to make is about my major. A lot of people ask me why I didn't decide to pursue a writing major or an English major, given how much I like writing, and especially because Johns Hopkins does have such an excellent writing program. And the way I view writing is, for me, it's a very personal process, and it's very much a hobby. Never in my entire life did I ever consider writing as a career. It wasn't something that I really wanted to make money out of or make a job out of because of how many other things I was interested in. I was interested in global affairs. I was interested in politics. I found that I could be interested in economics after I started college. So career-wise, I wanted to pursue those interests more, the international studies and the economics. And the writing was just a piece of who I am, and it's a piece that I wanted to keep personal. I didn't want that to be something that had a deadline or was judged too critically or critiqued too critically or had a dollar value assigned to it. So that's a large reason why I chose to not pursue writing as a major and as a career. That said, it's something that I still really enjoy doing. I actually enjoy writing my college papers if I have a good enough topic. And I loved writing the books. It's a journey every single time. So without further ado, let's get started with the seminar. So a lot of parents are concerned about writing because it's really a life skill. You see it throughout school, you see it through your hobbies, you see it in work. You have all sorts of different writings, like informative writing, persuasive writing, projects, reports. On the creative end, you can do short stories and narratives. There's poetry, there's books. And then at work, I'm sure a lot of you know, and I'll probably find out in about 2 weeks, there's a lot of technical and business writing. So it is a life skill. So I understand the concern that parents have when they find that their child does not enjoy writing or is not the best at writing. Why won't you click? Okay. So the way I explain it to a lot of parents is writing is a very mental process, and the way I break it down is there's sort of 4 components, and they all work together more or less to create the process that is writing. So obviously there's reading, there's observation, discussion, and thinking, and all 4 of these things work in tandem to create writing. And writing in turn also reflects on your ability to observe and discuss and think and read about things. So it creates this very complicated, but at the same time very simplistic web of this mental process. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own process, and I just want to put this out there. This is how I like to do things, and because writing is such a personal process, it's obviously very different for each person. You know, people will have different approaches, different strategies. They'll enjoy different types of writing.
Hi Jess, sorry for interruption. On your screen, there's a speaker symbol, which is you know, hiding part of the slide. Is it possible to get rid of it? Sorry.
Yeah, I see that. I've been trying to figure out how to get rid of it. My computer's a little weird sometimes. Nope. Huh. If I do that. And now that's stuck. Okay, there we go. Now we're good. Okay, sorry about that. My it's a little old. I'm considering getting a new one, so if you guys have suggestions for good computers, let me know. Okay, so my process for writing. So in elementary school, I did a lot of journals, a lot of diaries. You can ask my mom. I like burned through those little mini notebooks. I think I went through like 5 of them. So I could always carry them with me and write about random things. I didn't write every day. You could see those days where I was more bored because I would write more, and I would write a lot of random things. You know, for example, one of my entries from elementary school, I remember I basically complained about the substitute teacher that we had because he was incredibly boring, and that was literally the entirety of the journal entry was my complaints about the substitute teachers. Other times they'll be a little more exciting, like things I did, or if we went on a field trip, or if July 4th we went to see the fireworks, I would talk about that. So it was just a way for me to get my thoughts onto paper. In middle school, I went into short stories and poetry, probably because we just did a lot of that in class. And there was a period of time where I was really interested in poetry, reading and writing poetry. And in 7th grade, we had a massive poetry book project, so that helped a lot with my creative expression. In high school was where I started with the books, and I think that's a genre or like a style of writing that I've really enjoyed, probably because I like the long-term aspect of it, the fact that I could go at it for months and months and months and always have something to come back to. I wrote a lot of different books. Not all of them were completed. Every time I came up with an idea, I would sketch it out, start writing, you know, go through a couple chapters, and if it wasn't working out, I would put it aside and, you know, come back a couple months later or just start over for a new one. College, because of my major, I've written a lot of papers, but over time, probably also due to my major, I've really enjoyed writing op-eds or opinion pieces for newspapers, and I think it was a very easy way for me to have a creative outlet that wasn't academically related but didn't require the full-time commitment of a book. So you can see over time it definitely changes, and person to person this approach and this process and what they like will also change. But I think the one main thing that doesn't change across the board is organization and goal setting. Every time you write, you want to have a very strong organization, very strong pre-writing process, and you want to set goals for what you're writing, how many pages, how many words, things like that, so you have a bit of a structure and you're not just, you know, attacking pen to paper and going on without any sort of a roadmap. This is something that I used to do when I was writing books. I would challenge myself to like write every single day, and I put this as my computer desktop background and filled it with little quotes to get myself motivated. This is for one of the papers I had to do for college, so this is sort of how I organize things. It's very, very detailed. Some people don't make it this detailed. For me, depending on the paper, it might get more detailed than this or less detailed, but it just goes to show that the planning process and the organization process is incredibly important. Okay, so back to that mental process. I'm going to cover each of these 4 points, starting with reading. So reading, I like to tell parents, approach it with an open door policy. There's very few things you want to restrict your kids from reading. You never want to close any sort of genre or subject or style or anything off to them. So when I was little, my mom and I would get into fights. Although I think my grandparents included would get involved, but we would get into arguments about me reading novels because I was always reading novels, and my mom always had a problem with it because she thought it was wasting time. And I've had parents come to me and have the same concern about how their kids are always reading 小说 and always reading fiction things, and they want them to read nonfiction. I actually think reading novels and fiction is highly helpful for the writing process, more helpful than reading newspaper articles or reading works of nonfiction, at least for younger kids, partially because of the level of creativity and stylistic changes that are involved in writing a fiction novel. The other thing I want to caution parents is New York Times bestseller lists are not literary masterpieces. The bestseller list is market-driven. It's basically what sells. What sells does not always mean it's written well. I had one parent during a past seminar ask me, how he should get his kids to read more serious books. And I was like, what do you mean by serious books? He's like New York Times bestseller books. I wasn't really quite sure how to answer this parent, to be honest, because during the time of that seminar, the #1 bestseller was 50 Shades of Grey, which I'm hoping there aren't kids listening to this. If there are kids, shoo them out of the room, because 50 Shades of Grey is a highly inappropriate 100% X-rated adult novel, and that was the #1 New York Times bestseller list. I tried it. It was not well written at all. Do not give it to your kids. Doesn't matter that it's a bestseller. Do not give it to your kids. So I just want to caution parents of this, misunderstanding with the New York Times bestseller list. What you should read are books that win literary awards. Those are the ones that have been tested by critics for their language and for their plot development and for their character development. So go for the award winners, not the market-driven best-selling awards. The other thing that parents are worried about is, the other type of serious books, the classics, the nonfiction books, the journal articles, biographies, autobiographies, those things. The point I want to make about this is it will come with time. Kids, they eventually will start to understand what types of things they can handle. They'll see people around them reading it, and they'll read it on their own. The first classic book I read, I was in 6th or 7th grade, and it was Little Women. And then I didn't touch another classic until, I think, 8th grade when I read The Count of Monte Cristo. So it definitely comes with time, and some kids just will never like classics. They have there's a very particular type of language to classics that's a little difficult to get your head around, and some kids just don't like that type of language, which is fine. There's plenty of non-classic books out there that kids can read. The same thing goes for nonfiction and journal articles. And typically by high school and college, they'll start reading things like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine and things like that. What my parents did was they had a subscription to Time Magazine, and we would always get it in the mail. And I honestly don't know if my mom ever read them. I don't know why we had the subscription, but it was there. So out of pure curiosity, I would start reading it. But she never forced me to read it. She didn't subscribe to it just so I could read it. So just have the material there, and they will read it. The thing you should be concerned about with reading is, #1, are they reading at the appropriate age level? Make sure that, if they're 8 years old, they should be reading things for an 8-year-old, not for like a 6-year-old. And are they reading the appropriate books? Like I said, 50 Shades of Grey is not an appropriate book. So those are the actual things you should be concerned about. Another big thing with reading is, so going from book to paper. The reason why people read to improve their writing is because it increases their vocab content. It gives them a more varied exposure to different types of sentence structures, and you get a lot of creative ideas from it. A lot of my friends said that, if you read my books, you can like track which authors I was reading at the time, because my writing style sort of reflects the authors that I was reading. So you can see that those two actions sort of bleeding over into each other. And the important thing is it's not just restricted to books. There's obviously a wide variety, from newspapers to short stories to poetry to famous speeches and essays. The thing I want to emphasize, though, is do not make your kids memorize these things. Because I feel like with memorization, they won't really understand it. They're just going to be seeing the words. It's like playing piano, and you're just hitting the notes, but you're not actually absorbing what the music is. So just let them read it and let them absorb it. If you really want them to absorb a certain type of style, just give them a lot of newspapers, and they'll start writing sort of journalistically. If you want them to pick up a certain author, just give them a lot of books by that author, and they will pick up that language usage, or like the way they express an idea, or the way they structure a sentence or a paragraph. But memorization, I don't think, is entirely necessary, because their head is only going to be thinking about the words, not the meaning behind the words. The last major thing I want to talk about is the book list. So one of the questions I got for this seminar was, what lists of books can you recommend? And I see this in every single WeChat group, is what list of books can you give to my kids? And every other person is publishing lists of books. I saw one list of like over 2,000 books. And here's my reaction to all these lists. Just put them away and let your kids decide. Just take them to the library, sit down for an hour, and let them pick what they want to read. I refuse to believe that. It's like if I dropped you off at the mall, gave you an hour, and you can't come out and say you didn't find anything you liked. That's impossible. So take them to the library, take them to a bookstore, and let them find something. I'm sure your children know what types of books they like to read, what types of genres, what types of authors. They can figure it out. They know their own mind better than you know their mind. So trust them on this aspect. Obviously, there's some books that I would highly suggest, like Harry Potter. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I will suggest it to every single person. But I've also had friends that just didn't like it. They tried it, and it just didn't click with them. So just because someone gave you this list, or someone else's kid is reading a book, does not necessarily mean your child has to read it. The list of books out there is complex, and it is endless. There are new books coming out every single year. If you ask me right now what your fifth grader should be reading, I could give you a rough idea based on what I enjoyed as a fifth grader, but there was also a 10-year gap between me being a fifth grader and your fifth grader, and times have changed and books have changed. So the person that has the best list is your child, and it is in their head, and you need to trust that they know what to do with that list. So moving on with the rest of the process, the next major thing is discussion. So writing is pretty much words on paper. The other major thing we do with words is we talk with them. So if you can talk about things, you will be able to more easily write about things. Where does that discussion come from? They need to feel very comfortable with words, whether it's on paper or coming out of their mouth. And that comfort with words, it does not happen on a screen. It does not happen by reading articles on a screen. It does not happen by reading words on a page. It's a very practical, applied process. You need to say words in order to be comfortable with them, and you need to write words in order to be comfortable with them. So just reading a lot isn't enough to get you to write well. You need to engage that list of vocab words in your brain. So when do you have discussions? Car rides, dinner time, family time. I know a lot of Chinese parents, their kids have a lot of activities, which means you're always driving them from place to place. They go from piano class to dance lessons to swim class, and then come home, and then they need to go to Kumon or some bushiban or some tutor. They're in the car a lot. And during that time is when you can talk. Do not hand them a phone. Do not hand them an iPad. Just talk to them. Ask them about their day. Don't ask them about homework because that's the last thing they want to talk about. But just ask them, you know, what types of activities they did today, and tell them about your own day. You know, what types of things, what you ate for lunch, for example. Was it good? Was it bad? You know, maybe you were late to work today. Was that okay? Was it stressful? Talk to them a lot and ask them questions and let them respond. Family time. A huge pet peeve of mine is when I go to restaurants and I see all the parents talking and they just set the kid up with an iPad, or they put the kids in a corner with phones, and the kids just don't interact with each other. They don't interact with the parents or with the adults. And that creates a huge communication problem. If they can't speak basic words, there's no way those words are going to get onto paper. Another question I got for this seminar was this one parent said that her son is okay communicating with his friends, but he doesn't really talk to adults that much. And my question is, how often do you talk to your son? Non-academically talk to your son. No homework, not like, did you finish your homework? Did you finish your Kumon? What did your tutor say to you? Non-academic time, how much did you talk to your son? And how much does your son talk to you? If your kids have difficulty just carrying a basic conversation with their parents, there's no way they can carry a conversation with an adult, because it's just not a medium they're comfortable with. So talking a lot gets them comfortable with word usage, and that will increase that level of comfort when it comes to paper. The last thing I would say is quote-unquote book reports. So kids, they write a lot of book reports in school as it is, so don't make them write book reports for you. Don't do that. Your children will hate me. They will also hate you for it. But if you see them reading something, ask them what it was about, what the chapter was about, what their favorite character is. And don't just make it an interview. It should not be question and answer, question and answer. Make it a discussion. So if they're reading, let's say, The Hunger Games, probably because a lot of teenagers have read that, and you ask them what it's about, and the book itself is a very ethically complicated book. So don't just have them spit out a summary to you and let that be it. Ask them what they think about it, whether or not they think the characters did the right thing, what they feel about, you know, the competition format that's in the books. You know, like pick a bad character and see if, you know, you can find out like why they're so mean or why, you know, they're so angry at everyone. Try to dissect the book and make it a discussion. Don't just make it an interview between the two of you. And the more comfortable, again, the more comfortable they are with those words, the easier it is for them to get it onto paper. So the last major points of this process is observation and thinking. And in order for them to be able to write well, they need to have thoughts. There needs to be something in their head. A huge complaint I get with a lot of my students when they first start writing, like the first 2-3 weeks, every time I give them a prompt, they just completely blank out on me. They don't know what to think, even if it's something very basic, like if you could be anywhere in the world, where would you be and why? And most kids just completely have no idea how to answer that question. And I don't know if it's because that's something they've never thought about or because they haven't seen enough of the world or thought enough about the world. I remember getting that prompt when I was a kid, or I think the prompt was like what my favorite place in the world was. And I remember writing about Yiheyuan because that was some place I went to every summer with my grandparents. Another one of my friends said her favorite place was the library because there was a lot of books. So we all had immediate answers we could go to. One of my students, not a Chinese student, I gave her the same question. She was a swimmer, and I said, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you be? Her immediate answer was the Olympics, and I was completely blown away because that was an answer I had never heard before. And you want to give your kids situations where they can be in an environment that they will be able to think about and later be able to write about. So how does that happen? First of all, they need thoughts. We live in a very high-tech world. I mentioned this during the debate seminar 2 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. But we live in a world currently where there is information literally at our fingertips, from pictures online to the news, Twitter, Facebook, WeChat. I see a lot of parents sending each other articles, sending each other pictures, sending each other even stickers on WeChat. How much of those actually reaches your kids? Do you share anything with your kids? Do your kids share things with each other? Those things, that sharing, that digital network is a huge aspect to today's inspiration for writing. On top of that, you want to respect their ideas and their opinions, but don't be afraid to challenge them. So if your kids disagree with you, that's perfectly okay. You want to take that disagreement and sort of push it and turn it into a discussion. Turn it into something they can think about, really critically think about. I know for one of my students, this was way back before they built the 9/11 memorial. This was when they were still discussing whether or not to build the Freedom Tower. And I actually had this discussion with her. I gave her the prompt. I was like, do you think they should build the Freedom Tower or not? And that was a very controversial topic at the time. I had my own opinions, but I didn't want my opinions to oppose too much on hers. So I gave her the facts and let her tell me what she thought. And then I, in turn, told her what I thought. But there was no point in time where I felt obligated to make her change her mind to agree with what I said. I was 100% interested in what she said, and I 100% respected that. And I knew where she was coming from, and I'm sure she knew where I was coming from, and she gave me that mutual respect. So only with that mutual respect can you guys have a productive discussion. Aside from these, outside worldly things, there's also internal inspiration, and that comes from their hobbies, whether it's drawing, reading, running, dancing, things like that. Those are things where they can pull some sort of writing material from. And I want to say that hobbies should aim to be wireless. I know a lot of people will say their kids' hobbies are video games or the phone or the computer, which is understandable. I know some people who really, really enjoy video games, but on top of that, you should have other hobbies. People are complex characters. Like me, I have multiple hobbies. I like to draw. I like to read and write, obviously. I like to debate. I very recently got into dancing. So don't immediately assume that their only hobby is video games. Don't reduce your kids to that simplistic label, per se. You want to take away the wires and see what else they have and let them develop that, because that will in turn make their own writing more complex. Okay, so some more things for thoughts. You want to go to a lot of places, and I know a lot of parents are like taking vacations. I know the euro dropped, so everyone's going to Europe because now it's cheap to go to Europe. But on top of that, you want to make sure they're actually absorbing what they're doing at these places. Don't let them be taking so many pictures of where they're going that they don't actually see the places they've been to. And you want to involve them in the planning. So my parents were always really good with this. The first time we went to Mexico, I think I was 13 years old, and my mom literally the day before, 2 days before our flight, she handed me a notebook and she said, go online and research some good places we can go to in Mexico. So I went online and I wrote down this whole list of things that we could do, like dolphin swims and scuba diving and where, and I think I even included like prices on some of them, and like restaurants and like how we're gonna get. I basically made an itinerary for our trip to Mexico. We went to Mexico and didn't go to a single place that I had written down. But that was okay because I felt like I had contributed to this trip, and that made me really excited. And at the end of the day, we always talk about what was good. Like, oh my God, that steak was incredible. Like, sorry, Mom, but that steak is better than yours. Argentinian steakhouse in Mexico, way better than my mom's cooking. So that was stuff that we would talk about. And aside from these, big vacations, Europe trips, China trips, Mexico trips, we're always going to small places like art museums. We go to the park. We used to have a park down the street from my house, and sometimes we would just go there and talk. And we would, because we live in Jersey, so we go to the beach a lot. And there was always something interesting that was going on and something that you could talk about, whether it's, there's birds singing outside and it's 6 a.m. and they woke you up and you really want to go back to sleep, or you went to the beach and just the sound of the waves is the most calming thing in the world. Like, forget yoga tracks, just go to the beach and sit there and listen to the waves. But you want to find something interesting. Okay, I think it's good now. On top of that, I think it's really important that you and your kids enjoy something for what it is and not what it's worth. A huge thing I've noticed with kids these days is they're very obsessed with monetary value. They're always asking how much things cost or how much things are worth, which sort of bothers me because it seems...
We don't do that.
What?
We don't do that.
Yeah, because it seems very shallow. It's never been a topic of discussion at home. You know, for even very basic things that should be pretty cool in and of itself. For example, at Hopkins, I had an on-campus job. I worked in the library in the special collections department. And a lot of kids asked me about my job, and I was like, oh, you know, it's really cool. Like, I get to see a lot of old books. You know, when my mom visited, I pulled a copy of Holomon from the 1700s. 1700s? 1800s? Something like that. We have, you know, Woodrow Wilson's college application. We have, like, original copies of Shakespeare from the 1600s. So for me, that type of thing is priceless. Like, there is no monetary value to the type of experiences that I've seen at work. But when I tell my students about my job, their immediate question is, how much do you get paid? And I'm like, that's besides the point. Like, have you not heard what I've been saying the past 5 minutes? So, and for them, I can see the mental block is all they see is the money. And when that, how does that translate to writing? It means that when they see things, they don't see deeply into things. They don't see the color, they don't see the shape or the design or the inspiration behind it. They see the monetary value. Those kids will be excellent at writing price tags and pricing strategies for a consulting firm, which is great. Consulting is a great industry. I'm going into it. They'll be excellent at writing pricing strategy. But if you want them to write something creatively, or even want them to write a paper about, you know, a historical event or a current event, they're going to get stuck at the monetary value because that's their immediate reaction, and that's all they can think about. So you want to take away, I mean, obviously things have value, but you want to make it more complicated than that. For example, if a Picasso is worth $5 million, why is it worth $5 million? What's so special about the Picasso? Is it because Picasso painted it, or is it because Picasso was, you know, an innovator in modern art? So that's how you take a monetary value and you know, sort of bring it back to a more inspirational topic. The last thing is your kids need motivation. Give them a platform to show off. You know, when I was a kid, our living room and kitchen just had me and my sister's stuff all over it. I think if you go back on one of the kitchen walls, there's actually still like a yellow chicken where I wrote this very, very like short 5-sentence summary. And that's been there since I was in 1st grade. We just never took it down. The yellow chicken is still there. So hang up their work so they know that you're proud of them. You know, a lot of my friends, whenever I go to their houses, their kitchen is just filled. The refrigerator is covered with things. You also want to give your kids a platform online to talk about it, particularly with the world we live in now. Encourage them to start a blog, not for the sake of, oh, because Just Fong said so, or because, oh, it's going to give you more attention and you can get into college that way, but because you want to give them some sort of creative outlet and share it and give them a platform where people can comment on their writing. Also encourage them to enter into contests. Whether or not they win is not the point. The point is the experience behind it, the experience of writing something and sending it out to a publisher or to a contest or to, you know, even just like their teacher or a friend to look at and critique. You want to take them out of that bubble, because I know writing's a very scary thing to show off, but you want to sort of encourage them to come out of that bubble and let people see what they've written. For kids, particularly young kids, always encourage them, even if it makes zero sense, because you don't want to destroy that creative outlet. For one of this class I did a couple years ago, it was for the NJ Ask, we had a picture prompt, I think, and the picture was a Norman Rockwell painting of some kid looking over the diving board. And one of my students' brilliant story to this picture prompt was, this kid was Jess Fong's friend, was his teacher's friend, and I think he actually made the child my boyfriend, and he took me on a date to the pool, and I somehow fell into the pool into a black hole and ended up in a different world, and he had to come and jump after me and save me. That was his story. It made very little sense, but I appreciated the creative aspect of me falling into a hole, into a different universe. So you want to encourage that, because creativity is at its height when they're in elementary school, and if you tell them this is impossible, or that doesn't make sense, or this would never happen, you're going to narrow how they think about the world. So give them encouragement and don't expect perfection. They're not going to get it right the first time, which is fine. What they need to know is they can edit and revise things. You want to encourage them to do that, but don't say this is wrong and shut it down. If something doesn't look right, you can give them suggestions on how to make it better. And a lot of parents will tell me, oh, but they're all writing in English. English isn't my first language. You know, I'm not comfortable with it. My mom had the same problem. English isn't her first language either, but she was good at writing. You know, she was good at writing when she was a student, and she knows what good writing should feel like. And during my college application process, I would show her my essay, and you know, there would be words she didn't completely understand, and sometimes the sentence would feel awkward because it was a weird structure. But she would tell me, like, I'm not feeling anything. Like, I don't feel happy. This part I don't feel sad. This part I don't feel excited. She knew what good writing was supposed to feel like, and she would tell me where it wasn't, you know, eliciting that emotion. And she would often tell me, even as a kid, she said, if your reader isn't crying by the end of your piece, you've done something wrong. So that was her way of critiquing. But at the same time, she would also praise me. So if she did read a sentence that would make her cry or make her laugh, she would tell me, this is a gorgeous sentence. And that's translated into me congratulating myself. So when I go back and revise my paper, you know, particularly my thesis, my senior thesis, I went through like 4 or 5, 6 revisions of the whole thing. And I would be able to pick out where things were feeling off, because my mom had trained me into that process of go back, read, revise, go back, read, revise. And sometimes I would come across a sentence and I would think to myself, I'm like, wow, Jess, this is a really darn good sentence. Good job. So you want to train them to do that in their own mind, and that would make the writing process of, you know, revision and editing and finalizing a lot easier for them. So overall, you know, this is the summer, so you want to take it easy with them. But a lot of these things don't actually have to do with like the practical aspect of writing, and that's what you want to do this summer, is to build that mental foundation. You know, summer should be for relaxing, but at the same time, you want to build an arsenal of vocabulary. You want to build an arsenal of inspiration, of environments, of places and sights and sounds. And you want to give them that, you know, family support and that foundation, so when they get back to school in September, they can hit the ground running, and it goes very easily from mind to paper. So take these summer months and just build up their brain and give them the mental arsenal that they need to do well. So, I already went over this in the last slide, so I'll just, you know, flash it briefly, but I already talked about a lot of these things. All right, so thanks again, everyone, for listening to me. I know it's a Tuesday night, and you know, everyone's busy. It's the middle of the week. And thank you again for being so welcoming for, you know, of me in this group. And I will take a couple minutes and answer all these questions. Does this work?
Okay, thank you, Jess. I see a few questions there. And I think that the questions, and the questions were also emailed to you.
I'm kind of confused by this question. Did I use Wikipedia in that last example? I'm not sure which example you're referring to, but I didn't use Wikipedia throughout the entirety of this, like the college paper. Oh, the college paper. Yeah. Let's go back to that. So here's another big misconception that kids have about writing and research, which I guess is a good thing, but it's also very misleading. A lot of teachers will tell students that Wikipedia is not a valid source. To an extent, yes, Wikipedia is not the best source because anyone can edit it, but Wikipedia is also an organization that has a very, very strong editing process, and everything is checked 1,000 times. So when I write, I first go to Wikipedia to sketch out an outline, and then I fill it in with all the facts from more legitimate sources. But yes, I did use Wikipedia here. Any other questions? Are you going to make the session? I think these sessions are going to go on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. That's what happened with the last one, was the recording was saved and went on YouTube. How did you get books published? That's a very large topic for a different time. It was a long process, is all I can say. It was very long and very complicated, and a lot of communication and formatting involved. But that's something I could talk about at a different point in time. What are some books you recommend for third grade? In third grade, I mean, I can tell you what I read in third grade. Just bear in mind, when I was in third grade, the year was 2001. Why won't this slide click anymore? Come on. Yeah, I was in third grade in 2001, so I read a lot of these books, the Caldecott Medal Awards. I just went after them, and then I read a lot of Harry Potter and the series of Unfortunate Events. Those were good. But for today's kids, I honestly don't know what's on the third grade market. But like for timeless pieces, I would say Harry Potter is my go-to response for third graders. How to get a 9th grader to start to write. I mean, they should, 9th graders should be writing at this point, but I mean, I think your question is how to get a 9th grader to enjoy writing. So writing, it's like asking how to get someone to like math. I mean, for some kids, they just won't like it. I don't like math. My mom has tried. I'm sure teachers have tried. So, but to get them to enjoy writing, I think the best way would be to talk to them. And once you get them talking, they'll realize that there's a lot of things going on in their head, and they need some way to get it out there. And obviously, they can't latch onto a person all day and talk to them. So writing is the next best option. That was sort of how it was with me. When I was a kid, my mom, I would talk a lot, to the point where my teachers had to call my mom from school and complain to her that I spoke too much in class. So for me, if you wanted to get me to stop talking, the only way was to hand me a notebook, because the words had to go somewhere. Which of your works would you recommend to a high schooler? Funny thing about my books is I wrote them in high school, and the more I think about them, the more I feel like the writing was not that mature, to be honest. I was 16 when I wrote the first one, so you can imagine what a 16-year-old mind might look like. For a high schooler, I would recommend things like, The Hunger Games is great, or like read a classic that's actually been time tested and known to be very good. If you wrote a series, was it hard to keep a series going? Okay, so my first book was supposed to be part of a series, and I wrote the first book, wrote half of the second one, and just never finished it. So a series is very difficult. I think it requires a much higher level of organization than I was capable of. So start small, I would say. Don't immediately go for the long series because it requires so much planning. Just start with a short story. If you can handle a short story, then you can move on, because creative writing, like books and stories and things like that, is a lot more complicated than writing an academic paper. Is it effective to have a writing teacher teach my fourth grader to write, or is it better to be a self-directed process? It really depends on the person, because people's brains work differently. Some people, I've sort of always wrote on my own, but that was because my mom sort of trained me to be very critical of myself. Like, I would go back and read things and sort of pick out what was wrong. Some kids, if they're not so good at critiquing themselves, they might need that third person, whether it's a teacher or a friend or a parent, to pick out what the problems are. So it really depends on the person. For boys who are a good talker and arguers but not a decent writer, what can we do to help? I think so. There's always a disconnect with writing and talking, because the way you talk is different from the way you write. But the big test is whether or not they can organize an argument. A lot of people can argue sentence by sentence, like you say something and then they say something and you say something and they say something. But the big test is that organization. So to train both sides of that, you want to have them be able to pre-write really well. If they can structure an argument, then they will be able to argue really well, but they'll also be able to talk really well. No, my books are currently not available for sale. Let me see, there's a lot of questions. Oh my god, okay. When writing a short story, how did you organize it and plan how the storyline would go? I write an outline, like a bullet point, like A, sub 1, sub B. I write a very organized outline, sort of a rough timeline, and just take it from there. Yeah, but the organization, it depends on the book too. Some books require, like my first book didn't require that much planning. The third one required a lot more planning, so it really varies. And it varies on your approach to the writing too. I know some of my friends who write, they plan chapter by chapter or page by page. Other people, they just sort of have a loose idea of this is what I want to write about, and they go ahead for it. How do you recommend for someone to begin to read classics? Okay, so about reading classics, I think it would be great to recommend classics to your kids if you've actually read those books yourself. So I had this with my mom. When I was little, my mom really, really, really wanted me to read Jane Eyre. I knew the Chinese title of Jane Eyre before I knew the English title of Jane Eyre, because my mom said Jane Eyre so many times to me. But it was fine because she had read it herself, so I trusted her. Same thing with Count of Monte Cristo. I knew 基督三伯爵 as a title before I knew the Count of Monte Cristo, because my mom would not shut up about me reading the Count of Monte Cristo. So when I actually read it, I could talk to her about it. The thing with kids is they don't like to do things. I feel like adults too. They don't like to be suggested things unless the person making the suggestion has also done it. Otherwise, it feels really hypocritical. So unless you've also read a certain type of, a certain book, it would be very difficult to recommend it to your kids, because their immediate reaction is going to be, you haven't even read this yourself. Why do you want me to read it? So start with what you've read that you know is good and give it to them. And I do the same with my students. All the books that I recommend to my students, I've read myself and I've really enjoyed it. And because of that, my students also would recommend books to me. I read the Percy Jackson series in high school, so by that time, like, I was way beyond the age for high school, but because my student, like, I recommended a couple books to her, so she one day showed up with the first Percy Jackson book and was like, you need to read this, and out of, I was like, okay, I'll be nice and I'll read it and humor her, but it was really good, so you want to develop that sort of, like, mutual relationship. Do you teach debate class? This is a bit of a conflict. I sort of touched upon this during the last seminar. I mean, I don't want to advertise any classes or programs or whatnot, but I have taught in the past. I can theoretically, potentially teach. So that's that. Can you talk about college essays? I could do a separate seminar on college essays. It's a very large topic in and of itself. I would say, though, if you're, this was July, so start thinking about them like now is what I can say about college essays. My voice is going to go. Oh my God, there's questions in the chat box too. Someone wrote an essay. Oh, okay. How do you get writing? Every time when my son gets an assignment, it takes him a very long time to start because he's not sure where to start. So this is the classic situation of his brain is probably empty. That's what I've seen. Usually when I give someone an assignment or a prompt and they take forever, it's because they don't know what to write about. So for the short term, like that immediate assignment, the easiest way to do it is to just start listing things. Just write a list of every single thing that pops up in your head, whether or not it's related to the prompt. When your brain, it's like it's like a bike, like riding a bike uphill. You have to start, and the beginning is really, really difficult, but it gets easier the more you pedal. Long term, a lot of it's just about like inspiration and going places and reading things and talking about things and thinking about things. And the more you do that, the more stuff there will be in his head. So when the time comes, he can easily, it's like a bookshelf, and you just got to keep putting things on there. Sorry, I'm very brutally honest about certain things. I don't mean to say that your head son is empty. I'm sure he's very smart, but you just have to bring the things out of the emptiness. Any remaining questions? Okay, this is the last question I'm going to take. My 10-year-old started reading at a very young age. She loves reading. She is happy left alone to read mostly novels when she's not. Yeah, that's totally normal to not be interested in writing anything besides her secret diary. That's totally normal. That was me. I read a lot, and all I wrote was my diary. All I wrote was my diary, and then eventually that diary turned into stories sort of about me, but not really about me. Yeah, so that's perfectly fine. Just don't read her diary. Don't say do not do that, because if she finds out, number one, she'll be very upset at you. Number two, which is the worst thing, is she will stop writing in that diary. And for a 10-year-old, like, that diary is the best creative outlet she can have. So just don't read it. Yeah, don't worry. Okay, so here's the thing about elementary school kids. A lot of parents want me to teach their kids like creative writing, and they hand me a 9-year-old and they want me to be able to produce a story. It's very difficult because when they're 9, they're still trying to figure out sentences, like sentences more complex than I went to school today, like subject, verb, object. They're still trying to figure out how to make things complex, how to make their word usage more complex. They're still building their foundation of how to use language, period. It's very, very difficult to get an elementary school kid to produce a creative piece because there aren't enough words and there aren't enough types of sentences, and there just isn't enough material for them to work with at that age. And for them, it's important to let them be creative, through other outlets, whether it's art or music or dance. You want to give them a lot of things to later be creative with, take them places and showing them things and seeing, art, like good art and good movies and reading good books. But for them to produce it is very, very difficult. Because at that age, they're still trying to figure out the basics. It's like if you ask a 9-year-old to like compose a piece of music for you, he's still trying to learn his scales. There's no way he's composing anything unless he's Mozart. So, I think, yeah. So that's the last question I'm gonna take. I am in, I think, 4 of the WeChat groups, so you know where to find me. And again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope this was helpful. Do I hit stop? I'm gonna hit stop.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Thank you for the presentation, and thank all for attending. And yeah, there's a reason that we waited for 10 minutes because we want to make sure the system is stable, and we just want to wait for at least about 30 people to start. And yeah, thank you, Jess, again for the 2 webinars, and thank you all for attending.